Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about legendary kids TV shows and whether or not they should make a comeback. You might have seen in the news recently that a very much beloved children's TV show, Balamory, will be making a return in a couple of years' time. We covered it here on the channel. I've seen it do the rounds on social media. It seems generations are excited about that. Both those who grew up with the show, those who are maybe slightly too older but tuned in via younger siblings such as myself, and indeed newer generations too. Which got me thinking, you know, back in the day during the golden age of what I consider to be the golden age of kids TV, specifically CBBC, we're talking say between 2000 and 2007, there were hit after hit of these great fantastic shows of all different kinds of genres, all different kinds of varieties that was so popular, so beloved, not just by myself, but all my classmates at school, and indeed the generations who are now grown up, like me, because I see it constantly on social media. People saying, why can't this have a reboot? Why can't that have a reboot? Well, I wanted to talk about a few different shows and whether or not they could potentially come back. One thing I saw pretty much like a day or two after the Balamory announcement was the rumor, and some articles were doing a bit of disingenuous service and making it out seeming like it was going to happen, saying that the tweenies were going to come back. Now, I don't need to say much about the tweenies because, you know, I have a big history with them when I was a kid. We did a whole little 45-minute documentary on them to celebrate the 25th anniversary and just to celebrate the show in general, so go and check that out if you're curious. But as much as I think it'd be cool for the tweenies to come back, part of me feels like it was very much of its time and doesn't necessarily need a reboot. In fact, I believe one of the voice actors who got interviewed for these articles actually said they believed that it would work better as an animation as opposed to the live action form it originally was packaged in. And whether or not, you know, that would work or not work remains to be seen. But as much as the tweenies is beloved, will it make a comeback one day? Possibly, but part of me does feel like it was very much of its era and it doesn't need that comeback. But what about the game shows? Because game shows were such a big part of CBBC, particularly during my childhood, and one of them that I'd love to see make a return is 50/50. Now, if you don't know, 50/50 in many ways is a very straightforward game show. You have two different schools of 50 kids each who are competing in these various tasks, various games, in order to come out the winner with the most points. It's very simple. There's not many frills or twists and turns to it. Many of them are obstacle course based. They were often the most fun ones, seeing these kids try and duck and weave through all these obstacles. The famous final course, Avalanche, was always one of my favorites, where they have to grab the snowflakes, and if they wanted to be brave, they could try and grab that ever-elusive gold snowflake for bonus points. But it wasn't just about the obstacle course as well. There were games of concentration. I always remember the one where they have to guide the tongs through the metal wire without touching it, otherwise they lose points. That would stress me out no end, because with my eyes not being the best, whenever I do concentration stuff, my hand gets a little tremor, so I would not be doing my team justice there at all. Also, there were quiz-based ones. There were rounds literally where the host would just, they would pick a random number, and whoever that poor child was that got selected would have to answer the question. Now, the pressure that those kids must have felt that were selected must have been enormous. Imagine being one of the 50 kids from your school, mind you, these kids you see every day, and you get a question wrong, particularly one that your classmates might find really easy. God, that must have been... I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been. And it had quite a long life. I think it lasted from around 1998 till about 2005, so almost a decade, which for a kids' game show on CBBC is a pretty long life. It's clear why it was very popular. Again, very simple premise. It's not that complex. You're just in two teams doing various tasks, trying to get more points than the other. Oh, and you can't forget Finn. Was it Finn or Flynn? Here's a clip that'll give you the answer.
But before we get down to some serious stuff, let's have a little bit of a laugh with Flynn.
They'll either make you laugh or they'll make you sick. Yellow number 34 is Natalie. Now, after a wet and windy day, most will snuggle up by the fire and watch TV. Not Natalie. She goes to the garden, rolls around in the mud, and pretends to be a hippopotamus.
But it's not just 50/50. I'm talking about the gun shows. There was this period in the 90s and 2000s where a lot of the game shows involved this stuff called Gunge. Now, if you're American or grew up on Nickelodeon, you'll probably be quite familiar with Gunge. It's kind of their, one of their staples, one of their big things. But in the UK, gun shows were big as well. And one show that I think could make a great return is Get Your Own Back. Now, this was hosted by Dave Benson Phillips, who is just a joy of a presenter. He was on many a kids show when I was growing up, but he was just full of so much energy, so much vibrancy, and I actually got to see his live version of Get Your Own back at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival all the way back in 2015. That was really special for those 90s kids. So why do I think this should make a comeback? Well, the premise of Get Your Own Back was in a way similar to 50/50, except the dynamics were different. So instead of it being two teams of schools, it would be a child and their parent. Now, the whole premise of Get Your Own Back, get your own back on your parents. Aren't they always nagging you about cleaning your room and doing this, doing that? But it was a lot of fun. And again, the famous bit at the end with the famous gunge tank, would you answer enough questions to gunge your parents? That was always a good fun to watch. Rest assured, my parents would never let me apply for that show because, you have to get your parents' permissions. They've got to be up to being humiliated. But it was always great to see that dynamic play out on screen. And again, very simple premise. I can't imagine it'd be that expensive to produce. So Get Your Own Back 50/50, 2 core game shows. Get them back, man. Get them back on the telly. But it wasn't just the traditional sort of game shows or these, taking part sort of game shows. CBBC in this golden era also pushed out some innovative stuff, namely Bamzuki. Now, some of you might be going, oh my god, I remember this, and some of you will be going, what on earth are you talking about? Bamzuki was a digital-based game show. So what you do is there was this program that you could download on your computer, and you design these creatures called Zooks. Now, these were basically like, almost like little robot style, like Robot Wars type things, but they were creatures. You could build them with, all different sizes, different dynamics, different parts, and they'd have different strengths. And then you'd submit them, and if you got on the show, your Zooks would either fight each other in battles, or again, they'd compete in tasks to score the most points. It was a really unique show for the time. It was really cool. Now, you see some clips now, and it'll probably look wildly dated, like the technology, all this sort of stuff, but you're telling me you can't make an updated version, you just a brand new version of the software that'd be infinitely more sophisticated, there'd be infinitely more possibilities of Zooks to create with different designs and different features, equally a whole different amount of challenges as well you could put them to. Don't tell me this isn't impossible. You could do this. I don't know, I just think CBBC benefits greatly when it's pushing out shows, not just dramas, but like, the game type shows as well, that are really pushing the boundaries. And even though it's dated now, for the early 2000s, Bamzuki was different. It was out there. It stood out. I remember designing a few Zooks, God knows what they were, but they were probably terrible. Another type of show that I'd like to see come back is very much the presenter-led show. Now, I know obviously the presenters feature in the links between different programs and certain strands, particularly, like the weekend morning strands used to have hosts intersecting the programs and they do a few skits. But I'm talking about shows like Dick and Dom in the Bungalow, man. This show was wild. If you've ever seen any episodes of this program, you'll know that it was absolutely bonkers. Hosted by Dick and Dom, these two wacky lads. They get up to all sorts of things, all sorts of different games involving kids who got involved. Sometimes their parents would get involved. You had all these returning characters. My favourite always used to be the cop, D.I. Harry Bat. Harry Bat, that was his name. He'd always smash through the door.
Enjoyed your morning, bungalow. Everybody stay where you are. Detective Inspector Harry Butt, Scotland Yard, Duty Squad.
But it was just insanity. And some would look back at it now and say, come on, Adam, this is very much a product of its time. It wouldn't really work in the 2020s. But I don't know. They recently went on a 20th anniversary tour celebrating 20 years of the show. And from what I heard, it did pretty well with audiences. Theatres were being packed out. Audiences were responsive. They could take part. It was still just as fun as it ever was. So even though they might not be known as much to today's generations, I think Dick and Dom could very much make a return on CBBC with a programme similar in style to The Bungalow. Now, on CBBC during this era, say 2000 to 2007, whilst they were making their own stuff or having stuff made in the UK, they also had stuff that would be like collaborations or made overseas and would often result in some very quirky outcomes. And one of the peaks of this, I think, was this little show called Ace Lightning. Now, I'm sure I've just unlocked a major memory for some of you there. Ace Lightning was this co-production. I think it was CBBC and correct me if I'm wrong, was it a French-based or Canadian-based company? I can't quite remember. But the premise of it was this British kid, Mark, moves to America with his family. He's feeling a bit, as people do, a bit lost, a bit lonely. And then I think, I'm going off memory here, I'm not reading a script or anything. Isn't it like lightning strikes his house and his computer? He plays this game, this video game, Ace Lightning, and then the characters jump out of the computer and they become real. Now, keep in mind, this was like back in 2002, and yes, you look at this now, and this looks janky as anything. It's very dated CGI, looks very ropey, definitely wouldn't fly by the 2020 standards. However, this was a weekly television show which featured CGI characters in most, if not all, of the scenes. So fair play to the actors and also the producers for churning out episode after episode with these characters. You had Ace Lightning, who was obviously the good guy, sort of like Buzz Lightyear inspired for sure. And then you had Lord Fear and his gang of bad guys and they were all looking for pieces of this amulet, I think it was. I can't remember what it was for, but I think it helped them. I think for Ace Lightning, if he got the amulet, he could defeat Lord Fear and then go back home, I guess. And then if Lord Fear gets it, he can destroy the world because, that seems like a ultimately fair compromise. And it always baffled me. From memory, the pieces of the amulet were scattered around this carnival. And Lord Fear based himself in the carnival. So just why he couldn't go around and find them himself was a bit baffling. But it was, it was a quirky show. And yes, it's very of its time in many respects, but you've got to acknowledge how unique this was for the time, and it helped make CBBC stand out as well. So, and again, with today's technology, not saying it'd be a cakewalk, but you could make a weekly television series with a mix of live action and CGI characters probably far easier than you could have done back in 2002. So Ace Lightning himself, do I think he should have a reboot? Lord, no. As much as I enjoyed it back then, and it does hold a soft spot, it's corny, it's cheesy, but it has that 2000s charm. I think Ace Lightning is very much an idea for the past. I don't think this will come back, nor do I think it should. I think if you're going to do something like this, that mix of live action and CGI, it should be with a completely new idea, like Ace Lightning was. But also, before we pivot into the dramas for kids and stuff, I want to just say, classic shows have a place on CBBC too. And when I say classic, I'm talking about animations from like the golden age, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Now, don't tell me this doesn't have a place. When I was growing up, I specifically remember, I want to say it was between 2004 and 2005. Before school, if I turned on to CBBC, it wouldn't be any of these new shows that would be on. It would be this old cartoon called Batfink. Now, Batfink was around or first produced during the 1960s. It's very cheaply made, and I mean very cheap. If you watch any number of these episodes in sort of quick succession with each other, you'll see loads of frames are reused, like there's various repeating plot points. It's very repetitive in that sense, but sticking on an episode before school every day, that was great, and I loved Batfink. I mean, you can never forget that catchphrase, "My wings are like a shield of steel."
Your bullets cannot harm me. My wings are like a shield of steel.
But yeah, I think classic cartoons, and you can include stuff from the 80s and 90s, it's been long enough, but have a place for them on children's TV, on mainstream children's TV, not just on, digital channels where you have to pay a subscription for. Get them in there, front and center on CBBC. But I think a lot of people would argue in that golden age, and still just as crucial now, are the original dramas or sitcoms. Again, CBBC and other children's channels of the day would import stuff from the United States mainly. You'd see a lot of their sitcoms, stuff that originally aired on Nickelodeon or the Disney Channel, for example. They would eventually make their way over. I remember enjoying Lizzie McGuire, Drake and Josh, shows like that. But again, it wasn't on those original channels. It was when they were brought over. But there was also a slate of stuff that was commissioned here in the UK and has arguably stood the test of time. Tracy Beaker is one that stands out for me. Now, this was based on a series of books revolving around a kid in a foster home that she affectionately calls the dumping ground, and you see all these foster kids interact with each other, and this went on for quite a few years. Now, I'd never read the books, but when I first watched Tracy Beaker, I was enamored with it, and it was my first exposure to, I guess, a foster home and the concept of foster children. You got to remember, I was only young when it started, about 6 or 7, I think. And that concept had never really been floated around with me, so I learnt a lot from Tracy Beaker as well. And yes, you've got all the catchphrases and all the memes now, but it did have a lot of emotional moments as well, and it dealt with some very difficult topics, not just fostering, but even things like death, which sometimes, those sort of live-action kids shows try and stay away from. Now, it has had various revivals, reboots of its own, so, do I think that Tracy Beaker should immediately come back? No, I mean, all the actors are grown up now, and it's nice when they do the occasional, reunion story or the continuation, but I think the core of what that was has very much passed. And we have The Dumping Ground, the spin-off series, which, just correct me, is that still going? Because that has had season after season, way more than Tracy Beaker ever had in its original run. And, you've got your various sitcoms and stuff, and I know CBBC still airs some live-action stuff now, but you've got to include some stuff that teaches kids something, the important messages, whilst also being entertaining, like Tracy Beaker was. I know, is it called The Next Step, which is a classroom one that has broken boundaries in the last few years, and that seems to still be going and be a success, but I hope that flow of original dramas or original comedies or hybrids or whatever you want to call them does continue, because they are important. They are some of the shows people best remember from that era. Basil Brush, man. How could I forget Basil Brush? Now, of course, Basil's been around since the 1960s, but the show that aired in the 2000s, I loved that show. And it doesn't matter that Basil Brush is just this very old-looking puppet. It was funny. That show was funny. Don't tell me it wasn't. It was hilarious. So, Basil Brush should make a comeback? Absolutely. I'm advocating for that right now. Bring back Basil Brush. But it's not, we've covered a lot of stuff, but there's also more artistic things. Does anyone remember Smart? Smart was on CBBC for quite a long time. Now, it sort of wound down in sad circumstances. One of the presenters, Mark, unfortunately took his own life. There was various reasons for that. That's a whole other story in itself. But during its peak, it was this art program where you could not only see people submitted artwork, but you learned about different kinds of art. And they also featured Morph, the little Aardman character. He was always fun to watch. And I think those sort of artistic programs are crucial. Some would say they're a bit boring or a bit slow, but I found them fascinating to watch. And I know there's rumors that Art Attack is coming back with Ramesh Ranganathan, I think. I haven't seen any official confirmation of that happening. I mean, Art Attack was equally as beloved as Smart was, but I hope there is still some sort of art-based program, not a segment within another show, but a fully fledged, half an hour art-based program that kids can watch and enjoy and learn and be inspired from. But of all the ones I've mentioned, and I could go on forever about various programs that I enjoyed in this golden age, and you probably did too, but there is one I haven't mentioned yet, which is arguably the GOAT. And that is, of course, Raven. Raven, man. Oh, God. Now, this is technically a sort of game show, but this was a game show unlike any other. This had mythos. This had a story. This has its own lore. So the premise is a bunch of kids, I can't even remember where the world is, but they're in the woods, basically. They're in the jungle. And they whittled down one by one after doing these various tasks, which were all very ingeniously thought out. They were very intriguing. They were very cool. And at the end of each episode, one of them had to face the way of the warrior. But eventually, the winner of each series, what did they get? I think they got their own staff, because that would have been cool back then. And they just got bragging rights, I guess. They didn't win anything. What, you think they won money? Don't be ridiculous. But James McKenzie, the guy who played Raven, he's iconic in his own right. I mean, loads of us remember him fondly. He's always advocating for a return. He'd love to come back. He could still do the part very easily. I mean, that whole look he had to him was just amazing. The accent as well. But honestly, go and check out episodes of Raven if you haven't seen them. They were just so unique at the time. You really felt like it was this proper adventure game because, most of it, I'm assuming most of it, wasn't in a studio. It was in the outdoors. These challenges felt epic. They felt unique. There was a sense of urgency about them. You were thinking who was going to win overall. Just a great show. And, should Raven come back? Absolutely, it should come back. You're telling me this wasn't one of the most exciting programs that came out during the 2000s? Because it was. And if they do this now and do it properly, if they still make the challenges interesting but keep it to its roots, whilst also updating it a little bit to fit in with modern audiences, then I think Raven could be just as big as it ever was, genuinely. So I'm with James McKenzie on this one. Please bring back Raven, bring him back as well, and just make this show what it was and let everyone be happy. Let the generations experience Raven. They deserve to. As I said, that was just a smattering of programs that I remember from my childhood that I touched on and discussed whether or not they should have reboots. Some of them, yeah, sure, as we mentioned. Some of them, no, maybe they were just products of their time and we should leave them as that. But the ethos is, children's TV is coming under fire a lot. We've talked a lot on the channel about how children's TV, particularly the traditional ones, the old guards like CBBC and CITV, which of course is now gone, but, they are gradually being wound down. They're being shrunk. They're being crunched, all these cuts and measures. And I just hope in whatever form it takes, whether it's online only or anything like that, that children's TV keeps to stuff that made it really popular back in the day. But that is all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please remember to leave a like because it really does help us out. And subscribe to the channel if you're brand new as well, because we'd love to have you aboard. In the meantime, I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Bruce Danton, Derek Chambers, Shaun Knock, Daud Khan, Liam De-Maine, Trev Hughes, Ajmac 200017, Deck, Evan Hart 41, Jen, Traffi, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Ted Elliott, Marnanel Thurman, John Wakefield, Kieran Bolton, and 40-something Manchild, our AMTV staff members.